All right, so good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have all of you here. It's a beautiful Sunday today outside. So that's in light here inside as well. So thanks so much for coming. Today you're going to have a lecture from Marco on the Eastern. What's the message beyond the Eastern burning, right? So, but before we do that, let's get started with a message and a prayer that Michelle will do for us, okay? Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The message from the Happy Life from Divaldo Franco and Joana de Angelis. Be a real friend. Know how to conduct yourself with discretion and nobility with those who choose your friendship. Discretion is a rare treasure in our friendship. It is normally replaced by intensity and unsincereness. Everyone likes noble and discreet company, which inspires confidence and leads to tranquility. Listen, see, follow the conversation with nobility and faithful to the confidence deposited in you. Let's close our eyes. Let all the problems, all the worries we have be outside, and let the light get inside us. Think about your loved ones, your friends, neighbors, family, and spread this light to all people around the world with love, sympathy. Be thankful for the day. Be thankful for our life. Many blessings for those who are in suffering right now. Send good thoughts, good vibrations to all doesn't have family, friends to share the love, to share the presence. God bless our day, and we can take all the message we will receive here today, try to put in practice outside and in our heart. So be it. We have our friend Marco now. Marco.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Today I want to take this opportunity of being here and talking a little bit about Easter time. That's what we're going through. I want to take you guys into a journey. And this journey starts long before Jesus. Because I want, first of all, for all of us to have like a historical perspective. Why do we have these interesting celebrations in the equinox of spring, which is what we're going through now, which in other words, the days are the same, the light and night are the same during the day. That's what we're celebrating, springtime. And then during the fall, where again we reach that same point where the hours of light and hours of darkness in the day are the same. Easter, as we understand, of course, changed dramatically over the history of humanity. And it's still changing, as we're going to talk a little bit about today. But since the oldest times in human history that can be cataloged by any type of written account, being in stone, being in hieroglyphs from Egypt or paper, People celebrated this time of year as a transition into light. We're coming from the darkness of winter. So everyone in the northern hemisphere, particularly the northern you are compared to others, you would have lived through a very harsh time in the winter. Remember, there were no snowplows, electricity, natural gas, insulated houses. None of that ever existed before. So surviving wintertime was difficult. You had to prepare yourself for it. There was no daylight, very few hours of daylight. And then we'll reach a timing point during the year where light starts to rise up. And we have about 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness. That's what we call the tipping point. And from now on, the days will be longer. There will be more light. There will be more life. Nature teaches us this beautiful lesson of everything coming back to life. The trees, the animals, the birds nesting. I have a bunch of them in my backyard. They nest every year in the same spot. The robins, love them. But it's a big lesson. So we know this, but every single human being that incarnated in this planet actually knows about this too. Because when we started incarnating on Earth, spring was there already. So we learned from it. So even before we talk about Easter and the Passover and all that, this time of year is very important. Because it does represent a rebirth of life. Even if I didn't use the word Christ. I'm talking about what nature is teaching us. And we're going to use this symbolism. And it's interesting because religion explains things that words alone cannot explain. Sometimes very hard to put word on things. Words sometimes, they have a very narrow meaning to them. And what happens is, in situations where you're explaining your relationship with God, symbolisms are way more powerful than words. And that's why this time of year is also full of symbolism. And there are symbols that represent this transition, that represent this new life of spring. Now, you see the title, I'm going to talk a little bit, like you have the Easter bunny there, because that's like the tail end of the transformation of Easter time for us. It started as very early on as a celebration of spring and renewed energies, renewed life, renewed light, and now it's into a chocolate egg hunt. So that's how we've adapted and transformed this time of year. And then right in the middle of that, we're going to have the real message, which is Jesus. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So of course, all these things that we're talking about, Easter, Passover, spring, all happening around the same time of the year, as I said. And we're going to talk now about the historical perspective of this, and also the religious perspective to this. That's where Spiritism is going to guide us, is going to enlighten us into extracting the real knowledge behind all this. So, talking about historical perspective, let's go back in time a little bit. So, first of all, remember that if we go to even before the Passover, every single culture of individuals that incarnated on earth had this inner understanding of a spiritual life. It's always been there. Spiritism was not new, saying that, hey, we're the ones talking about Spiritists. Sorry, we're not. Spiritual life has been described in history thousands and thousands of years before any of our religions that we know today were born. And because of our level of evolution, we relate way more to evil spirits than to good spirits. We're always afraid of them. And that's not new either. Now we know better. And Spiritism gave us the light of understanding that. But if we go back 40,000 years ago, people, even at that time, they were afraid of some type of entity that would bring some negative spells or bad fortune or bad luck, if you call it that way. And cultures have created ways of deterring those, even though they never seen them, but they firmly believed on them. And I just brought some examples because that will tie up in the history that we're going to talk about today. So that little wand is it's made from ivory. That's from Egypt, and they used that to counteract or protect pregnant women from evil entities. That's interesting, right? So we're talking about over 6,000 years before Christ. Okay, and that's interesting. There's a nice pattern. If you go online in the British Museum, they have a high resolution image of that. You can see actually all the details of the drawings that they've made on it, which is quite amazing and intricate. So what they believed is that if you're pregnant, I know there's a lot of pregnant ladies here, and someone stared at you in a particular way, your kid would absorb that negativity. So they used the wand to block that type of spell or evil eye. That's what we call it today. And then continue on, and even more recently, that little symbol here that we all know, it's in many people's homes and places and everywhere. So that is called the Nazar. That's exactly the same thing. So that is supposed to counteract the evil eye of this negative or evil entity that somehow would bring some disruption to your life. It could be from a person or it could be from a spiritual world. The extrapolated eyes that you see are also seen in gargoyles, which is this very grotesque figures that live on many, many buildings. Even in downtown Toronto, if you look up, you see some of the buildings will have this very grotesque looking figures in the outside, particularly the older ones. Churches have that too. And that's exactly to do the same thing, to protect us from evil entities. So you see now we moved about 8,000 years in history there, and we're still believing in the exact same things. So we're not reinventing anything, we're just changing because likely we've incarnated that time too, and we keep that. That's part of who we are. That's why things take a long time to change. Most of you know this. Oh, jack-o'-lantern, that's Halloween. And it's funny because that happens in the equinox of fall. That's when the world is technically going to a time of darkness. So the Celtics, many years ago, believed that there were a couple nights in the year when the transition into winter started, or to the longer nights and shorter days, that evil spirits would roam at night, and that was around time of harvest. So that was around the time they were harvesting and preparing for the winter. Remember, there were no longos at that time, right, for tinos, right? So you had to harvest and stock for the entire 6 months of winter. So they wanted to, they thought that during that time and at night, particularly because it's misty, it's fog, it's dark, it's cold, some evil entities would come in and, work against us somehow. So they created the figures of similar. The pronounced eyes with a scary face. That's the same we see in the gargoyles of the churches. That's the same thing we've seen since the medieval times. And the reason why we do that, if you don't know, it's not to make Halloween nicer. It's actually to protect you from evil entities. That's the original idea behind the jack-o'-lantern. And that's why it stays up at night, because that's exactly the time when they thought that these entities would attack you somehow. Okay? So that's the tradition. Most people don't know why they do it, but that's kind of an interesting knowledge about it. Jews were not different. They had their own traditions. And we call that together apotropaic magic, which literally means that you're protecting yourself from some type of evil entities. The way Jews used to do this is by selecting in this month in the Hebrew calendar, it's called Nizar. So Nizar, by day 10 of the month of Nizar, that falls within March and April throughout the year, they would bring into their houses a 1-year-old lamb that was pure, had no sins. In other words, did not procreate or did anything. So it was like a 1-year-old, sin-free, healthy lamb. So their lambs were selected on day 10 of the Nizar month. By day 5, everyone was attached to them because the lamb was actually living inside their homes, which is quite interesting. And the tradition at that time is that the lamb would be sacrificed by people who had the clean hands and the clean hearts. Later on, after the 70 years after Christ with the new temple, it started to be the priests that do this. But before that, during the Exodus time, that's where we are right now in time, which is about 1300 years before Christ, it used to be done inside their homes. So they would sacrifice the lamb. And there was a very particular ritual that goes with it that I don't think we have to describe in details because it's not very happy moment. But the idea is that they would paint their houses with the blood of the sacrificed lamb. And the idea is that, and this is reinforced during the time of Moses, and I'll get there, that the evil destroyer, that's what they call, there's some type of evil entity sent by God, would skip their houses if their houses were painted by the blood of the sacrificed lamb. So all Jews did that. So they would paint during the Passover time. And that's why the name Passover actually started. The Passover means that the entity would go over your house but no into your house. And then when Moses came in, the 10th plague against Egypt, remember historically they were in captivity for 400 years in Egypt. Slaves. And they were not like living there and having fun. They were actually helping Egypt with their technological advances of architecture and engineering as slaves. So they're working in their houses, they're working in their construction areas. Very hard time for them for 400 years as slaves. So when Moses came into the picture, to God, remember they believed in the punishing of God. God would punish people. That's what they believed at that time. So God would send 10 plagues against Egypt so they could bargain their freedom based on their plagues. So the 10th, they sent locusts, they sent floods and diseases, the cattle died. There are all sorts of plagues against Egypt. But they said no, they wouldn't free the Jews. Until the 10th plague, which is said that God would send his evil destroyer spirit or something into the houses of the Egyptians, and they would kill the firstborn child, which is the oldest son of the house. So that reinforced this, because if they painted the blood in their houses, that would not happen to them. So they all did it, right? And then we know the history. They ended up leaving Egypt, literally running away, because of course the Egyptians changed their mind. They changed their mind during all plagues, basically. But then, as history tells us, they were able to cross the sea, and then the sea closed on the Egyptian army that was behind them. And that's what we know in history, right? But the reason why I bring all that is the lamb represented for them something that they would connect very much to. And the sacrifice represented the lamb, the innocent lamb, taking away the sins of people in that house. So it was a shock. Killing that lamb generated some type of frustration, sadness. But at the same time, gave them the chance through that sorrow to become better people. So that was what they believed in. And we're not here to judge what they believed in. It's just that's exactly what they've done. Today, as you all know, the whole meaning of the historical context is summarized on the rebirth, the resurrection of Christ following the Christianism, and more popularly, the exchange of chocolate eggs, which is something quite recent. It started after the chocolate industry came to light in 1820s. So that's when the chocolate egg started. But it's funny because the eggs have been around, and there's like reports of that 60,000 years ago. They found ostrich eggs with drawings in the outside. So eggs have been around for a long time. We've just switched and changed the way we see them. And the reason why, it's quite obvious. There's two main reasons. One, because the eggs represent a new life, like the rebirth of life inside the egg. But also, after Christianism, it represents the empty tomb of Jesus. So if the egg is empty, so that's why people used to have empty eggs. You will crack the egg, and the egg was empty. So that will represent the fact that Jesus resurrected from the death. See, there's so many interpretations for the eggs. But what's interesting to know is that all those things that we're talking about here have been present in humanity even before all the religions we're talking about were ever existed. So we're just adapting and transforming our own knowledge over time and time. And that proves to us that we're doing the same thing over and over. That's the same. Me, as in spirit, I probably lived through that time. And I follow that. And I keep that in my mind. And I now adapt it to my new reality. That's what we do. Right? But let's talk about the real message. This is what, if we had to take like a comprehensive understanding of what Easter is, this is what we need to focus. Okay? So, of course, I don't have time to go through the entire existence of Jesus incarnated in this planet, but I'll try to summarize it in the last days, because that's what we're going through now, right? Remember that even the dates are not precise, but if you look back in the biblical texts, even all the Gospels, they would describe that Jesus entered triumphantly into Jerusalem last weekend. And remember, that's when, they celebrated his, welcomed him back in Jerusalem. Of course, he would go all around the small places, teaching and praying and living with people. And then he would return to Jerusalem. That makes actually a lot of sense, because if you think of Jerusalem was the heart of the this land at that time, the Israeli kingdom that was controlled by Rome, as you know. So he presented himself to Jerusalem as this new hope. He didn't do anything magical. All he was doing is he was living with fishermen. He was eating their houses. He was enduring their difficulties together with them. So this is a different type of hero for people at that time, or entity, or God. They didn't even know what to call him. So they ended up calling him king. Most people call him the King of Jews. That's why he was actually sacrificed. That's why he was killed. Because people believed he was proclaiming to be the King of Jews. And that was obviously a punishable offense, because there was actually a king there. Herodes. He was the designated king by Rome. And there was Rome, which by the prefect Pontius Pilatus, that was controlling the entire region, because that was the Roman Empire at that time. So you couldn't proclaim to be a leader, because that would be really bad. But he never did that, of course, we know that. He was the opposite of that. So what was Jesus teaching us in the 3 years that he lived with the apostles? He was teaching us an unconditional love. He would love not by saying, I love you. He would love by living with the people that he wanted to help, enduring their own problems, their own lives, sitting at the table with them, working. Some people have a hard time understanding this. Jesus likely, he woke up really early in the morning and went fishing. Why not? He was living with fishermen. And we have descriptions of him in a boat with the fishermen fishing. He would actually go into a boat away from the land so more people could see his speeches. So he was living like them. Illiterate. Tax collectors. Prostitutes at the time, although we don't have evidence for that, but that's what they believed. All sorts of people that society said, you know what, forget about them. That's exactly where he was living. And that's exactly where he was teaching us everything we know about love. So that's a really powerful message that, of course, scared many people away at that time. We still don't understand what's unconditional love. We don't know. If someone tells you, yeah, we know, watch out. I don't think we know yet. I think we know a little glimpse of it, maybe, but not in reality what that is. So when Jesus returns, he was like hearing people, he was helping everyone, he was teaching by his own actions, he was telling people to forgive each other, to love each other. That's almost the opposite that was done at that time. But anyways, he walks in then in Jerusalem, and then a few days before his crucifixion, which most historians believe it was a Wednesday, not a Thursday, he has this Last Supper, or the Lord's Supper, or the Last Supper. There's so many different translations of the same moment, where he brings everyone together. And he knew what was about to happen. He knew. He tells Peter, by tomorrow, you're going to deny me 3 times. Was he stressed about what was about to happen with him? Some people like to take the fact that when he go to be crucified, he said, Lord, why have you forsaken me? He was showing weakness. He was actually talking about us, not him. Because his message was to make us be like him. We didn't listen. So when we look at that, we actually should look back at us. because what he's saying there is that I love these people. And I know exactly what's going to happen with them when I go. Same thing when I was sitting at the table with the apostles. So in John Gospel, he washes their feet. An act of humbleness. So he's not treating them as servants or as people that work for him. He's not putting himself above anyone. He just washes their feet. That's probably one of the most pronounced signs of humbleness, love, and understanding of life that you can get. Remember, these are not doctors of the law. Remember, he talked to doctors of law at that time multiple times, and you know what happened. They wouldn't even understand him. But at the same time, their ego wouldn't allow them to learn from Jesus. Because they were, why am I going to listen to a fisherman? Why? And then in the other three Gospels that we have, in the Bible at least, not the ones that were left behind, but he breaks the bread, serves the wine to everyone, and then he said, this is my body, this is my blood. Some people that take that literally, which is fine, that's their level of understanding of what happened. But he was actually showcasing the act of sharing. Equally. Loving. Equally. Giving up himself so people could live on in a better way. That's exactly what he was telling us. This is me, not the bread. The act of spreading the fuel of life, which is love. And then he says in the end, I really know what's going to happen with you guys. There will be sorrow. There will be difficulties. You guys will be really, really sad. I can tell that. But if you miss me, if you feel that you really want to reconnect to me, do this again. Repeat this gesture over and over. Celebrate what we collectively call Easter. Because that what they were having, the Last Supper, is actually part of the Passover. Remember, Jesus was a Jew. There's nothing shocking about this. He followed the exact protocols of the Passover at that time. Right? They prepared the lamb too, although, we don't know exactly what happened during that time, but the lamb was certainly prepared by the apostles. That's what they used to do. Right? He was not breaking the law. He told us so many times the same thing. All he wanted us to do is to celebrate his love. How we do that? By action. Not by buying anything. Not by saying things. He'd never done that. He would always use his actions to show us what to do. So when Jesus was then, the same night as the accounts, he was betrayed, as we know. And by the way, every time you think about the well-known betrayal of Jesus, just be careful what you think. Okay? Because I can guarantee you that all the spirits involved at that time, at that process, are still suffering the sharp darts of our own minds. You, me, you. Because we keep sending them the sharp darts. Why did you do this to Jesus? Why did you do this to Jesus? Remember, our thoughts have weight. We create this. Anyways, learn to forgive. Easter is about forgiveness too. And then he's prosecuted, and of course I don't have a lot of time to talk about all the process of prosecution of Jesus, but in general lines, they take him to the individuals at that time that were representing both Rome and Jewish faith, and the king of the land, which is Herod Antipas at that time. So they first of all take him to the high priest. The problem is that Caiaphas, which was the high priest at that time, was behind the whole plot. He was the one designing the whole thing. And of course, we know the history. Jesus really didn't challenge anything he said, but he was very aggressively mocked and judged in that way. But they couldn't do much, so they ended up sending him to Pontius Pilate. So send him to there. He doesn't even know what's happening. He's from Rome. He's there as a prefect. He's just an administrator. Like, there's nothing wrong with this man. Take him to Herod. He is the king of your people, because remember, Rome allowed that to happen. Rome allowed them to keep their faith and their institutions and all that during that time. Then things collapsed later on, but up to that time in history, they still had their own institutions. But then Antipas looked at him and was like, you do the same thing, I don't have anything to do with this man. He's calling himself king of Jews. That's what people are claiming. I don't see he as a king. He doesn't look like a king to me. I don't care. Go send him back to Pontius. And then the last time we know exactly what happened. He was left to the people to decide, which is of course not that. We know exactly why that happened. He knew what was going to happen. He had full responsibility of his decisions. And if you read the book 1,000 Years Ago, Manuel, you know a lot about that. That's an amazing background story about all that process. I would highly recommend you reading that book. And then he's crucified and he dies at 3 p.m. on a Friday. That's what historians all agree. And then people call him the Lamb of God. Why is that? Remember the story of the lamb? This pure animal entity lives with people inside their houses for a specific period of time, and although have not done anything in life, is sacrificed. So that process would give back life into that family and somehow forgive their sins. That was the animal, lamb. So they compared it to the lamb because Jesus did the exact same thing. He came, he lived with them, he taught them. Of course, this is all symbolism, of course. Don't take this literally, please. And then he was sacrificed so we could learn what is real unconditional love. So that's why he's called the Lamb of God. And coincidentally or not, 3 p.m. on a Friday is a time of the sacrifice of the lamb. That's when the lambs are actually killed in the temple at that time. So it coincides even on a date. So, of course, there's a lot to learn from all this, but if you think about the message of Easter, that's what we're celebrating today. Although, by the way, the Easter name comes from a completely different etymology. It comes from an old English goddess called Artemis. Then it's called Easter. Then we transliterated over time. And that's why in many countries that derive from the old English culture, Easter's changed from Pascha, which is Pascua in Brazil, and Pascha, it changes. So that was but the meaning is the same. So we're not really trying to reinterpret things, but he showed to us in the end, and that's the message. A great liberation. How to be free. That's what he did. Free from the physical boundaries that we create. matter. We attach to it. We don't let it go. He showed us, no, you don't need any of that. Your kingdom, remember he said this so many times, is not from this world. Take that coin back to whoever owns that coin. I don't care. And through his discarnation and reappearance, he's not showing us that he defeats death. That doesn't make any sense. We know that death does not really exist. Right? But he's showing us that, listen, life continues. And the image that I'm showing you is that you're all going to be free one day. Free from your intellectual restrictions that you create yourself. Like, remember the kings of the law, the doctors of law at that time, they thought they were so smart, intelligent, they couldn't accept the truth. What about the moral? Remember, they weren't trying to stone people to death. He would say, like, the first one had actually never committed any of that, please throw the first stone. Moral freedom, intellectual freedom, emotional freedom, physical freedom. That's the representation. Even go to the Passover. It's a classical story of imprisonment, physical imprisonment by the Egyptians, and then free them from that imprisonment. But what was Jesus telling us is that we're not talking about restrictions of movements. We're talking about restriction of evolution. You have the potential to be perfect. At any timing point, you can do it. We create the boundaries, so we take a long time to do it. But that's who we are. It's going to take a long time for us to perfect ourselves. We could do it much faster if you wanted to. If we really comprehended and put that message inside us. That's what Jesus is telling us. Jesus is alive. He helped create our entire galaxy. He's so beyond our comprehension. Talking about, he's in the realm of the Christic spirits, which we have no glimpse of whatsoever what it is. Because I always tell everyone that, it's particularly when people starting Spiritism, they're like, hey, I want to live in the Astral City, or the Nosolar. Yeah, I want to live, because that's like heaven. I'm like, Nosolar is a beautiful city, no doubt about it. It's so close to us, evolutionarily speaking, that we can understand it. Can you understand Nosolar? I can. They take a bus to go places. I can do that too here. They have a governor, ministries, and this and that, and lunchtime and playtime. And I understand that. So that proves to me that there's a long way to go still. If I understand it with my minimal intellectual ability, that means that that's actually very close to me still in evolution. And it proves to us how far we are from understanding what true love and evolution is. That's what Jesus tried to do. And that's why he was, even in the last hours, he was talking to God. He said, God, listen, I'm here, and I'm trying. I'm doing my role here, which is like show all these people that forgiveness is the law, that love is the law, that evolution for all by loving each other is really the message. And he tells us. The last time he met the apostles, he talked about forgiveness. He told Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. That's fine. He didn't even use the word forgiveness because he never even thought about it. He already forgave before thinking. So that's doing thing when the laws are inside you. I don't have to think about it. I just do it. We had this discussion in a minute in the car coming here. Judas Iscariot, he knew it. He served him. He washed his feet. He was forgiven even before everything started. And he ends by saying, do you want to celebrate what we're talking about today? Love people like I loved you. That is the message of Easter. Oh, is that a problem if I buy chocolate eggs? No, of course not. There's not a problem buying chocolate eggs. That's not a problem. Oh, I'm not going to have my son running around eggs anymore. Why? That's okay. That's a costume that we created. But don't let that be the message. If you want to exchange gifts in Christmas time, that's fine. Not a problem with that. But what do you have inside you? What's the gift that you're actually giving to that individual? What are you giving to other people during Easter time? A hard time? Then it doesn't matter how many eggs you buy. Sorry. You can buy the entire truckload of chocolate eggs. That doesn't make any difference. What's the energy you're putting in that egg? Have you thought about this? Your thought materializes around you. So when you're sitting here, I can't see it. I don't have that type of eye. But everyone else in the spiritual realm sees what you're thinking right now. Because you are what you think. That's who you are. That's the only thing that does not have shekels. Is your thought. We still behave in a way because people tell us to do. Marco, don't speed on QW. Okay? You're going to get a ticket. I still do. Sorry. A little bit. But some things, in my mind, I don't have shekels anymore. There's not a people telling you, don't think this, Marco. That doesn't work. So that's who you are. What Jesus was saying is exactly that. Saying, listen, do you want to celebrate all this? Bring that within yourself. Be the message. Don't tell people what to do. That doesn't work. That's why they walked all over afterwards, and you remember that what happened in Pentecostes, and and they started to speak tongues. Of course, the spiritual world was helping out them. They could speak any language. They had access to amount of information all through mediumistic channels. We know exactly how that works. Spiritism helped us with that dramatically. But they were the seeds of the message. And that's exactly what Jesus wants us to do. Always, but particularly during the Easter time. It's not about celebrating the fact that he appeared in a physical body in front of people. We know people can do that. Spirits can use ectoplasmatic fluids and present as a physical body to anyone. That's possible. For Jesus, that's like this. Not a problem. He can do it at any time. He's not going to break the law of God to do it, so he does it in a very particular situation to teach us something, because of course he's a Christic spirit. But that's not, in Spiritism we understand that. That's not the big deal of the story. His message is actually what's the big deal here. And that's the one we don't do, because that's the hard one. Believing that he's still alive is easy. We all believe that, most of us. Even other religions do. Any other religions will have texts about Jesus. The Quran talks about Jesus, and Mary, and the apostles. The Jews, they talk about it all the time. Of course, there are versions that disagree with things, others don't agree, but it doesn't matter. It's always there. But that's what Jesus wants from us. And just because today is April 16th and April 18th marks the anniversary of this book, the Spirit's book, April 18th, 1857. I just want to bring it here just quickly in the end, after we talk all about this, the history of Jesus and the Lamb and all that. I'll give you my personal story on this. The first time I read the Spirit's book wasn't too long ago. It was about 10 years ago. First time I read the book entirely from end to end. And before I read that book, I still firmly believed that I was totally fine in my life and evolution of life and, doing things right? Because I could not comprehend the truth behind messages. I had a hard time believing in things because I couldn't explain them. That's the way my mind works. Being someone who's trained to find flaws in theories, that's what I do for life. I'm a scientist. The number one thing I do is how to spot a hole in a theory. That's what I'm trained to do. And fix it. That's part of the methodology of science. Right? Find a problem, create a hypothesis, objectives, test it, and prove it. That's how my mind works. Because I was never able to wrap around the history of Jesus using that approach, I thought I believed it. If you asked me 10 years ago, do you believe in Jesus? I was like, yeah, for sure. I believe in Jesus. Oh, why are you asking this? Did I? No. Because the truth is, by not understanding who Jesus was, I was not acting, or at least trying to act in a way He's keeping telling us to do all the time. And you can see someone in any religion that's moving towards the goal of evolution by the efforts they do in being a better person. Not by the fact that they're divine entities. We're not. We're full of flaws 100% of the time. But the effort that we take to be better is what people notice, is what God is seeing, is what everyone around us is seeing. And that's what the energy that draws in your thought and surrounds you. Don't you have a friend that every time you bump into, you're like, wow, this person. Even if they don't say a word, just by their thoughts, what they are. So the message, even for me in Spirits, after I read the Spirit's book and I read every other Spiritist book, that I can now really understand, without a doubt, my faith has no doubts anymore. I'm done with them. I have it inside of me. And any time, in any planet I incarnate, in anywhere I go, it doesn't matter what happens, I'll be able to withstand my faith against anything. Any scientific theory, any alternative thoughts. Because I believe. That's what that book taught me. Taught me to be smart enough to think, rationalized. Take a time to understand things better. Read. Go after the knowledge. There's so much knowledge out there. Why we have to keep restricted onto whoever told me? Someone tell that. Oh, I saw that in a YouTube video. Go after the source. It doesn't need to be this book. Was just the window for me to reach that. Because I read books from even other religions. There's no problem doing that. The source of the knowledge is the same. Don't we have one God only? We can't argue with that. We all believe that. Right? We have all sorts of variations in interpretation, and that's fair enough. That's the level of evolution we are. But the essence of the knowledge is the same, that we should love one another. And again, that's what we should celebrate in Easter time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Mark. Don't go away.
No, I'm gonna stand here. I'm away from the camera now.
No, come. So we do have a few minutes for questions or comments. If anyone have any question, comment for us, or anyone in the internet, just let us know. Mark was there and he can read for us.
Yep. Okay.
Anyone? No? Anna?
Okay. Talk too much.
No, that's good. Thanks so much, Marco. So we're gonna get prepared for the passes. We thank you all watching us through the internet. As usual, before you close your session, go and do your own prayer there. It's always good to finish this moment with a prayer, right? And here we're gonna do our passes and our final prayer, right? Thank you, everyone.